Cool. Well, welcome everyone. So glad you've taken the time out to come out on a Saturday when you probably thought I could have been doing better things, shopping, cleaning, getting ready for the rugby. I know that's a bit of a sore spot. Sorry. That's true, you did. Well done. Hats off to you and what he is. And I've seen that healing just comes along as you just change your heart and you allow yourself to be molded by God. So this morning I'm going to be talking about depression. Don't know if you're all aware of that. So one of the areas that, or what I feel I've been called to do, and in fact I left medicine about 5 years ago to allow myself to have more time into this whole area that I love to do. And that is to show everyone, believers, non-believers, doesn't matter, how scripture keeps confirming science and science confirms scripture. And the two are so beautifully linked. And you're going to see that even today. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about depression, as I said. And the word depression, do you know, it actually comes from the Latin meaning to press down. And that's how often people feel when they have depression. And here are a few quotes that I've taken from people who suffer or have suffered depression. This is how they describe it. They say it's like a black cloak. You feel like you're being crushed. All you want to be is isolated. You get to a point where you think, I'm too much of a burden. It's so terrifying. You're in an absolute turmoil of despair. It is the grey cloud that comes over you and obscures all positive thought. You are living in a state that is not to you frequently worth it. You would, for that moment, prefer to be dead. It's a real illness, comes as a thief in the night and renders you helpless, paralyzed. You feel hopeless. What's the point of getting out of bed? Depression, it just eats you up from the inside out. It's like a monster inside your head that takes over. The worst thing is to know that my family and friends were doing all they could, yet I still felt so lonely. Anything they said to me, I managed to turn into a bad thing. I was literally my own worst enemy. I would come home and feel so exhausted that all of the voices in my head, from all that they said, and I would just sleep to block it all out. I didn't want to wake up because living was a nightmare. I felt sick with fear of the nighttime because that's when the voices got louder. I would get so frustrated because it seemed impossible to sleep, as if insomnia and depression go hand in hand. I knew I needed help, but asking for it just made me feel like a burden. I wanted to be free of meds and doctors and counselors and hospitals and negative thoughts. I felt as if I had lost myself and wouldn't ever be the same again. I had no motivation to do anything because I couldn't see a future for myself. Anxiety caused me to believe everyone was faking their love for me. Cheer up was the worst thing anyone said to me. These two words triggered thousands of horrible thoughts, and I was beating myself up for not hiding how I felt well enough from everyone around me. I wanted everyone to know how I felt, but I didn't dare tell them. Eventually, I just isolated myself in my room because no contact with people meant nothing could go wrong, surely. At the moment, I rely on medication, and I am grateful to have it because I know it has really helped me. At the same time, I balance the wish that I could be free of it with the fear that it might lead to a relapse. That was a 22-year-old girl, by the way. And here's what a 12-year-old boy writes. I know most people won't believe me, but I'm a 12-year-old boy, just imagine, with severe depression. I've had it for about a year. I just want to kill myself. I know exactly how these people feel. I don't show emotion anymore. I can't. I'm too used to crying and the pain of being beaten by my parents. All the hateful words they say to me. I hate my life and I want to die. This, folks, is what depression can do to any of us. But today, as Mike said, is about freedom. And if you see in the Bible, when Jesus went about praying for people and healing people, what he did first was preached and he taught. Because it's with teaching and with understanding that revelation comes to the mind, and then your heart, your spirit can open up to receive the healing power of God. So a lot of today is to inform you, to teach you, and to just show you what this is, and to understand things that you probably have never heard of. Many doctors haven't even heard of some of the things I'm going to tell you, because I've got it straight from the scientists who are at the forefront of research. And then later on we're going to pray. We're going to ask the Holy Spirit to come and just set people free today. So first of all, what is depression? Well, the way that medicine describes it is, it says it's a mood disorder, a disorder of your mood. It's actually the most common psychological disorder in the Western world. In fact, they say it's an epidemic and affects 1 in 4 people at some point in their lives. So in other words, in this room, typically about a quarter of you would have had, do have, or will have experience of depression in your lives. The thing is, we can all feel fed up, miserable, sad at times. And I guess a week ago there was some depression over Wales at around 7 p.m. But those feelings don't normally last long. They last a few days, maybe a week or two, and they don't interfere too much with life. But I'm not talking about that kind of, fed upness, sadness, I'm a bit depressed. No, I'm talking about when those feelings don't lift after a few days, or even after a few weeks, or even months. And they're so bad that they interfere with your life. You function poorly at school, at work. You can't even cope in your own family life. This is called depression. And it can range in seriousness. It can be mild, temporary. It can be sort of in the medium, you could say, or it could become very severe. And the severe form, or major depression, is what in the world of medicine they call clinical depression. And there are certain criteria you have to have, certain things you have to fulfill that diagnosis, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. And the interesting thing is that depression almost always exists with anxiety. So no point trying to separate the two and say, today's about depression and another time we can talk about anxiety. No. Very often they are together, and you're going to see a little bit later how one feeds into the other. Depression is massively on the increase in all age groups, and at its worst can lead to suicide, as you heard earlier. In fact, in the world right now, over 800,000 people die due to suicide every year. And suicide is the second leading cause of death in the 15 to 29-year-olds. Do you know that? And it's only second to road traffic accidents. Which is terrible. And the highest incidence of mild anxiety or depression is amongst the 50 to 54-year-olds. That's interesting, lots of reasons for that. And it's more likely to occur if you're divorced, separated, or out of work. So some made everybody laugh, because depression was so bad he had to end his life. Stephen Fry has depression, Ruby Wax, famous people, very wealthy people. In fact, who's heard of Winston Churchill? Yeah. Remember, he's the one with such a great personality, such a sort of formidable presence. Surely he couldn't have had depression. He's the one who said, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the country. We shall never surrender." He had depression. And in fact, he called it his black dog. Have you heard of that expression? And the WHO, the World Health Organization, has actually produced a really good video explaining depression very well, which I'm going to get you to watch now.
I had a black dog. His name was Depression. Whenever the black dog made an appearance, I felt empty and life just seemed to slow down. He could surprise me with a visit for no reason or occasion. The black dog made me look and feel older than my years. When the rest of the world seemed to be enjoying life, I could only see it through the black dog. Activities that usually brought me pleasure suddenly ceased to. He liked to ruin my appetite. He chewed up my memory and my ability to concentrate. Doing anything or going anywhere with the black dog required superhuman strength. At social occasions, he'd sniff out what confidence I had and chase it away. My biggest fear was being found out. I worried that people would judge me. Because of the shame and stigma of the black dog, I was constantly worried that I'd be found out. So I invested vast amounts of energy into covering him up. Keeping up an emotional lie is exhausting. Black dog could make me think and say negative things. He could make me irritable and difficult to be around. He would take my love and bury my intimacy. He loved nothing more than to wake me up with highly repetitive and negative thinking. He also liked to remind me how exhausted I was going to be the next day. Having a black dog in your life isn't so much about feeling a bit down, sad or blue. At its worst, it's about being devoid of feeling altogether. As I got older, the black dog got bigger and he started hanging around all the time. I'd chase him off with whatever I thought might send him running. But more often than not, he'd come out on top. Going down became easier than getting up again. So I became rather good at self-medication, which never really helped. Eventually, I felt totally isolated from everything and everyone. The black dog had finally succeeded in hijacking my life. When you lose all joy in life, you can begin to question what the point of it is. Thankfully, this was the time that I sought professional help. This was my first step towards recovery and a major turning point in my life. I learned that it doesn't matter who you are, the black dog affects millions and millions of people. It is an equal opportunity mongrel. I also learned that there was no silver bullet or magic pill. Medication can help some, and others might need a different approach altogether. I also learned that being emotionally genuine and authentic to those who are close to you can be an absolute game changer. Most importantly, I learnt not to be afraid of the black dog, and I taught him a few new tricks of my own. The more tired and stressed you are, the louder he barks, so it's important to learn how to quiet your mind. It's been clinically proven that regular exercise can be as effective for treating mild to moderate depression as antidepressants, so go for a walk or a run and leave the mutt behind. Keep a mood journal. Getting your thoughts on paper can be cathartic and often insightful. Also keep track of the things that you have to be grateful for. The most important thing to remember is that no matter how bad it gets, if you take the right steps, talk to the right people, black dog days can and will pass. I wouldn't say that I'm grateful for the black dog, but he's been an incredible teacher. He forced me to reevaluate and simplify my life. I learnt that rather than running away from my problems, it's better to embrace them. The black dog may always be part of my life, but he'll never be the beast that he was. We have an understanding. I've learned through knowledge, patience, discipline and humour, the worst black dog can be made to heal. If you're in difficulty, never be afraid to ask for help. There is absolutely no shame in doing so. The only shame is missing out on life.
Also do a great video for friends and family. And if you just write Black Dog Depression on YouTube, you'll see this video again and other videos like it. So just a few more facts and figures about depression. It's the single biggest cause in the UK, certainly, for taking time off work. I know as a GP I was endlessly writing scripts to give people time off. Not because they were lazy or because they couldn't be bothered, but really they were paralyzed, as you heard earlier. They were paralyzed from doing anything and they just needed that time to not think about work as well, but to just take stock of their lives and start getting some help. And there's a graph, a pie chart, bar chart rather, that's what it's called. Can you see that? That just shows the most common illnesses that show up in benefit claims. Can you see depression is right up there, the very top, even above back pain, which is another big problem. And here's a map of England and Wales showing the prescribing for antidepressants. So the purple areas are where it's most prescribed, and the sort of light greys where least prescribed. Can you see where you are? Can you see South Wales, Norfolk, North England, and even Cornwall, the highest areas for having prescriptions for antidepressants? So this is a great place to learn about depression and to learn about freedom, I think. So one might think, so thank you, I don't need that slide. One might think that being a Christian should make you immune to depression, or you should be able to just, by some kind of absorption, just not get depressed. Someone said this, they said the church is not the only judgmental group out there when it comes to understanding mental illness. There are other religions and cultures that look on mental illness as something you should be able to overcome by sheer will. And I know, unfortunately, that's the feeling in many churches. I just wanted to read you a little excerpt from this gentleman I mentioned earlier. His name is Graham Powell. So he's written a book called Christian, Set Yourself Free. And he learned these principles as a result of his own battle to overcome depression. But I wanted you to just hear this, to, in a way, to console you, in the sense that if you've been a Christian all your life, don't feel bad that, well, why am I sick? So I just read you a short excerpt. He says, I had been brought up in New Zealand in a home that believed in Christian principles. Our family attended the local church. As a child, my heart had been open to God, and at the age of 6, I asked Jesus to come into my life. However, within days of this decision, I experienced an onslaught of the enemy. Through no fault of my own, an incident occurred which literally overwhelmed me with fear. From that day, my mind was constantly filled with fears, and often the grip of fear made my body stiff and tense. I had to learn to live with this. In my teen years, the fears increased. But in spite of this, I continued to be an outgoing person, actively involved in many school activities, including the Christian group, in which I became the leader. Later on, he goes on to say, as he went off to find a career in the Navy, he turned away from the Lord. His fears increased, and he was engulfed with depression, self-pity and loneliness. Then again, later on in life, he went to a youth crusade, had a wonderful encounter with God, and came back to the Lord, asked God to forgive him. And he just said, I felt clean and forgiven. I knew that Jesus was alive to me, and Jesus was central in my life. He got on to be baptized in the Holy Spirit. But, he said, to my disappointment, after a few weeks, I found that the old problems were still there. Bouts of deep depression that would take days to come out of gripped me. During these bouts, pressures to commit suicide plagued me, and worry intensified. And then in this book, he goes on to talk about how he found freedom. So that's just a bit of background about depression and how people feel, some of the statistics. So, why does depression happen? Why do people get depressed? Well, sometimes it's an obvious reason, sometimes not, but there's almost always a reason. And this can be found, I found from personal experience, through prayer ministry or just through very good counseling. Just someone who's willing to listen to you and to listen and ask the right sort of questions can find often an entry point to something that opened the door to depression. But according to the world of psychiatry, this is what they say. The reasons why people can get depression. Number one, things that happen in your lives. For example, a distressing event like a bereavement, a divorce, losing your job. You may spend a lot of time over the next weeks and months thinking about it and mulling over it. And normally, after a while, you should be able to come to terms with it, come to terms with what happened, make a strategy to move on, and then those feelings will lift. But for some people, they get stuck with the depressed mood, and then it doesn't lift and becomes what we call that clinical depression. Now, for some people, that depression is driven by guilt of when something happened, e.g., if only I hadn't had that affair, if only I hadn't had that drink, my marriage wouldn't have broken down. If only I hadn't had that car accident and killed that boy, I wouldn't be like this. So that's guilt. For some, it's driven by anxiety, founded or unfounded. What if I'm one of the people at work who's going to be made redundant? What if one of my children is knocked down on the way to school? Gosh, all these thoughts just try to bombard you, and as you meditate over them and mull over them, it'll open the door to anxiety. For others, it's driven by anger. If the hospital had treated my father better, he wouldn't have died. But you just hang on to that and you hang on to that. So that's just when things can happen in our lives. Other times it's just circumstances of life. For example, you're alone because you are separated, you're divorced, you never got married. Your dreams of having a wonderful marriage just never happened. Or you're stressed because you don't have enough money. So just circumstances of life. Maybe you were sick from some other condition. And certain physical illnesses can bring about depression. Things like cancer, heart disease, painful conditions like arthritis, even viral conditions like after flu, glandular fever. I don't know if any of you have experienced that. If you have a bad flu, sometimes people can enter a depression that seems to take ages to lift. Other times it could be an underactive thyroid that can give rise to depression. Another reason is just personality or temperament. Some just have a personality that's maybe you're perhaps shyer, more sort of retiring than others, and your personality will make you more prone to depression. At one time it was thought that it could be in your genes. So have you heard that mentioned, that people say, oh yeah, I'm depressed, it runs in my family, it must be in my genes. But now scientists are questioning that, because we have found out about this whole concept of epigenetics. Has anyone heard of that word? It's quite a new term that's come about probably in the last 10 years or so, which shows that you may have a gene for something, but it may never be switched on. Or you could have a gene for something that's outworking itself, but it can be switched off. So in other words, science is now realizing that you can't just blame your genes. Instead, you look for what switched it on, therefore what can switch it off. Alcohol, of course, regular heavy drinking can make you more likely to get depressed and even kill yourself. Your gender, so women tend to get more depressed than men, and it may be because men are less likely to talk about their feelings, and sometimes talking about your feelings over and over can make you feel depressed. But they often find that men are the ones who commit suicide more and more successful at it, because they don't have an outlet for their feeling. And if they decide they're going to do something drastic, they usually carry it through, whereas women tend to be a little bit more emotional and say, oh, I don't think I can, I don't want to affect the family. Okay, so my advice to you as a GP now, with a GP hat, I would say to you that if you feel you may have depression, if you have a relative or a friend, the first step is actually to see your doctor, to just get yourself assessed, because that's all they'll do, and this is what they'll ask you, because there's a specific set of symptoms that you need to have, a minimum of 5, for at least 2 weeks, for them to think that you may be depressed. Okay, and I'll just read them out to you so that you can just get an idea of what they are. You feel unhappy most of the time, but you may feel a little better in the evenings. You lose interest in life, can't enjoy anything. You find it harder to make decisions. You can't cope with things like you used to. You realize that you feel utterly tired. You notice pains in your body, constant headaches. You may feel restless and agitated. You may lose your appetite. You may even lose weight, although the opposite can happen. You have an increased appetite and you therefore put on weight because you find you can't stop eating. Who's heard of comfort eating? This is where that stems from. It may take you an hour or two to get off to sleep, and then you wake up earlier than you want to. You lose interest in sex. You lose your self-confidence. You feel useless, inadequate, hopeless. You start to avoid other people. You may feel irritable. You feel worse at particular times of the day, but usually the morning. You may be thinking of suicide. Can you see, a lot of us, probably all of us, have some of those feelings probably every day. That's part of being human. And that's why when you get assessed, only your doctor can tell you whether this is just you being okay, you just got a difficult time of life, or actually, I think you're entering possible clinical depression. Okay? And the other good thing about going to see a GP is that they can just do some blood tests on you, urine test, to just make sure you haven't got any of these other things I've talked about, like a thyroid condition or a heart condition, just to make sure that you're not missing something in your quest to relieve yourself of depression. Now, the other important bit of news I want to tell you today is that when you have depression, you don't actually have a brain disorder. Now you might think, hang on a minute, I thought it was to do with the brain. Yes, there's something going on with the brain, but it's not actually a brain disorder. And this is what science has shown over the last few years. Because people used to think, once I have depression, that's it. It means I've got something wrong with the brain. It's a permanent condition, and I need to have therapy or medication all my life to make up for something that my brain isn't doing properly. And so it renders you powerless in a way, because you're at the mercy of your brain. And I want to show you, and you're going to see for yourself that this is not the case. Okay, that it's just a condition, a temporary condition brought on by something which you can reverse through some of the things I'm going to teach you today. And your GP may well suggest antidepressants and counseling. And I want to tell you today that as a doctor and as a Christian, I want to say to you, I am fully behind medication that helps you to cope with life. Sometimes people get the wrong idea that if you're a Christian, it means that if you're on any kind of help like medication, it means you're lacking in faith. You're not really a good disciple. Okay, that is not true. Because I believe God allowed medicine to evolve and develop to make up for the fact that Christians were dying early like the rest of the world. Because until the day comes when the church is fully switched on to the healing power of God and fully functioning in all of that, we all need help. Okay, so there's no harm in taking medication to deal with life and cope with life from time to time, but don't stay there. Take the medication to help you until you find your healing. And the best advice I would give you is, let the doctor who put you on medication be the one to say to you, hey, I think you can come off the medication because you're getting better. You're improving. I don't know how. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But let him or her be the one to do that. Are you clear about that? Yeah? Cool. So I want to talk to you about antidepressants, because that's a big question I find for people who have depression. Well, what about antidepressants? Some people say, I hate taking them, I hate relying on them. You know, what are they doing to my brain? What are they doing to my body? So let me just tell you a little bit about what's up-to-date information. Antidepressants are basically drugs that relieve the symptoms of depression. Okay? They were first developed in the 1950s, and they've been used regularly ever since. And there are 4 or 5 different types of them, which is not necessary to talk about today. So the next question is, well, how do they work? And this is very interesting. Up to a certain point in time, up to a few years ago, the psychiatrists and the world of medicine were sure this is how they worked. And you're going to see a video in a minute or two, about how they worked. But now, this is what the Royal College of Psychiatrists say. They say, how do they work? We don't know for certain. But we think that antidepressants work by increasing the activity of certain chemicals in our brains called neurotransmitters. Now, I wouldn't worry about these big words unless you're really interested in that, but has anyone here heard of the word serotonin?
Yeah.
Serotonin. Cool. Well, that's the big name in depression, because what is the commonly held belief is that if you're depressed, it's because you don't have enough serotonin in your brain. So the whole point of the antidepressants is to allow there to be more serotonin in the brain. So antidepressants aren't serotonin tablets, just in case anyone was confused with that. So you're not taking serotonin by mouth and then it goes to your brain, because for complicated reasons that can't work. Of a lack of serotonin, lack of these chemicals is another one as well, called noradrenaline. And if you simply corrected the chemicals, you would feel better. And it's a bit like this cartoon. Don't know if you can see it. So patient goes to the doctor and says, I've got depression. The doctor says, depression is nothing more than a simple chemical imbalance in the brain. Can you see that little bit up there? So he says, I'll send you away with a prescription for these little pills, and very soon a pleasant sense of confidence, control and normality will return to the situation. The patient says, I'm so grateful. Thank you. You're so marvelous, doctor. Thank you. Goodbye. And the patient leaves, and the doctor's feeling like, I saved another life. And that, doctors and patients would love it to be that easy. But the thing is, it's not. This is not the simple solution, because of some of the recent findings with science. And these are the controversies. I'm just going to share them with you so you understand that actually it's not as it was. Here's a controversy. First of all, if low serotonin levels were really what made you feel depressed, then increasing the serotonin should alleviate your symptoms right away, shouldn't it? That's only logical. But we've all found that antidepressants don't work immediately and can in fact take more than a month to improve your symptoms. That's a little bit odd. And also, serotonin increasing antidepressants, like you saw, don't work on everyone. Well, we all have serotonin, so why don't they work on everyone? In fact, the current estimates show that antidepressants on the market only work in about 60% of patients. And even the Royal College of Psychiatry says this: after 3 months of treatment, 50 to 65% will be improved if given an antidepressant, compared to 25 to 30% if given a dummy pill. It's not a huge number. Also, antidepressants don't work on children. You've got to be careful for use of them in the elderly because of all the side effects. So they don't work on everybody. They also said to themselves, well, if low serotonin was responsible for decreased mood, then if we did an experiment where we artificially reduced people's serotonin, they should get a low mood. Correct? It didn't happen. It didn't happen in everyone. Some people's serotonin were reduced and they were fine. Their mood was perfectly okay. And they also, when they did experiments on people with depression, they found that not everybody actually had low serotonin. Isn't that interesting? There we were all thinking that if we had depression, it must be low serotonin. But that wasn't the case. So, even though antidepressants increase serotonin, a lack of serotonin doesn't cause depression. Do you get that? It's a bit like saying aspirin treats a headache, but headaches are not caused by lack of aspirin. You see the logic? The trouble for many years is that people have thought of depression a bit like type 1 diabetes. Do you all know what that is? Type 1 diabetes. Because there are two types. Type 1 is a type which you normally have from childhood, where they realize that something's gone wrong with your pancreas, an organ in your body which produces insulin. It isn't producing enough, so that person has to have insulin injections for the rest of their life. Normally, just the thigh or in their belly. There's another type of diabetes that comes on later, but we won't go into that. So depression is not like that, in the sense that with diabetes, damaged pancreas always needs insulin, forever. Depression is not the case of damaged brain always needs antidepressants forever. No, because they found that depression does reverse with antidepressants, amongst other things that I'll show you later. But here's another interesting thing they have found that antidepressants do, is they actually increase something called neurogenesis or neurogenesis, which is a big word which simply means it causes new cells to grow in your brain. It actually creates new brain cells. That's what antidepressants do. And why is that important? Because in depression, your brain shrinks. A bit of a shocking thought, isn't it? Your brain actually shrinks, contracts, when people have depression. So the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is that scientists don't fully understand how the mind or the brain operates. They're starting to have great clues, but that's about it. And what they're now saying is, depression is not a brain disorder. It's not, but it's an accumulation of problems of life that fuel each other, that affect brain chemistry. So what is the solution? Unraveling those situations of life, bringing answers to those, and your brain will automatically heal itself. So we'll talk about that a bit later today. There are also many long-term studies which show that depressed people treated only with medication are very likely to get depressed again. Okay? And this is what the psychologists and scientists are saying, is that it's those people who explore their thought life, explore their past, and look at the way they make sense of themselves in the world, and they stop themselves from going down that much practiced way of thinking that leads them to the prison of depression. It's those people who take the challenge to do that who find full freedom. Now, does that sound like anything that you've heard of in the Bible? Yeah. Romans 12:2, it says this in the New King James. It says, "Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." In the New Living Translation it says, "Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think." Psychologists and scientists are now realizing that that is the answer to freedom from depression. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more today. We're going to take a break now. Hope you enjoyed the first session. We could have tea and coffee, so Mike will give you some instructions.